The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is probably the most effective law I think Congress really has ever passed. It virtually eliminated the kind of blatant and terrible discrimination that was going on. That was particularly intended and unfortunately effective in keeping Black Americans from being able to register and vote. But it's been extremely effective. It is easier to register and vote today than it's ever been in our history. Unfortunately, what I think too many people don't understand is that, or at least political leadership doesn't understand, is that you have to have both access and security. Because, yeah, you want to be sure that every eligible American is able to get to the polls and is able to vote. But if their vote is then diluted or stolen because of a fraudulent vote or because of mistakes and errors made by election officials and others, it's in essence the same as they're not being able to vote at all. Unfortunately, the U.S. has a long history of election fraud. It's something the Supreme Court itself noted in 2008 when it upheld Indiana's new photo ID law. And it's a problem that has not gone away. And part of the issue here is that in the big push to increase access, I think many have forgotten that you also have to allow security. And one doesn't cut out the other. You can have both access and you can have security. And an example of this that I would just give you quickly is that, look, when you register to vote in this country, I think the average American believes that election officials do a lot of work to verify the information that you've provided. To check, is this really the person's name? Do they really work at this address? Are they really a U.S. citizen? Unfortunately, election officials don't do any of that. They just simply take the information on a card and register you to vote without verifying any of that information. Many states, New York is an example, you don't even need an ID to show up at a polling place. That is a problem in terms of the vulnerabilities it creates, because unfortunately there are people who are willing to take advantage of that. We saw that just recently. Remember last summer in Paterson, New Jersey, city council race there was overturned. 4 locals were charged by the state attorney general with criminal absentee ballot fraud. 2 years ago, 2018, we had a congressional race overturned in North Carolina, again, due to illegal behavior, this time also involving absentee ballot fraud. There are, I think, 7 individuals there have been criminally charged by that. And there was enough fraud to overturn the results of elections. And there are other cases pending around the country where people have been arrested and charged. Just one other quick example I'd give you, and because I don't think a lot of people heard about this, but look, last summer, a former congressman from Pennsylvania was criminally charged and indicted. He's become a campaign consultant working for various candidates in multiple elections. And he was indicted for bribing an election official in Philadelphia to stuff fraudulent ballots into ballot boxes on behalf of his candidates. The election official, by the way, has already pleaded guilty to that. So we've got to work on both access and security, and you can do both. You can provide security. You can also ensure that every eligible American is easily able to get to a polling place, to cast a ballot, and to have their views and ballots counted in the election process.
Do we have any estimates on kind of the prevalence of voter fraud, or is it just the times we catch it? We know, like those prosecutions that you mentioned, but do we have any reasoned estimates of how often that actually takes place, either caught or not caught?
We don't, because part of the problem here is that, for example, if in a state like New York, where you don't have an ID requirement, how are you going to catch the fraud when it occurs? I think there's two indications here of the potential size of the problem. One is the Heritage Foundation, where I work, we maintain an election fraud database. Now, this is a listing of proven election fraud cases from around the country. We're constantly adding to it. It is not a comprehensive list. It's just a sampling of cases. We're up to 1,317 cases, and these are all of relatively recent vintage. That is just the tip of the iceberg. Last year, another organization, Public Interest Legal Foundation, obtained the voter registration lists and voter histories from 42 states across the country. They then compared the data. They found that from the 2016 and 2018 federal elections, they found potentially 144,000 cases of possible fraud. This included, for example, 14,000 individuals who are registered in more than one state and who took advantage of that to cast 2 ballots in a federal election. They found over 80,000 people who are registered more than once in the same state. Election officials don't realize it, and they took advantage of that to cast more than one ballot. I think that gives you an indication of the potential size of the problem. Unfortunately, too often, cases don't get detected, and even when they do, they don't get investigated and prosecuted by either state or federal prosecutors.
Is casting multiple ballots a crime?
It certainly is.
So
that is highly illegal.
Yeah. So of these 14,000 in potential fraudulent ballots that were cast, where the person was registered in 2 states, has any action been taken, or are those being followed up on, or is it one of these things where we have on the books that's just not?
No, and see, that's the other problem here is, look, the Public Interest Legal Foundation went to a lot of trouble to get these state voter registration records. They were very careful in the way they did the comparisons to make sure that it was the same individual. They published their report, and do you know, not a single election official in any of those affected states has contacted them saying, please send us the names of the voters you found so we can investigate and determine whether, in fact, that actually happened. No law enforcement official, either state or federal, has called the Public Interest Legal Foundation asking, again, for that information on those specific voters so they can investigate and potentially prosecute. It just hasn't happened. If it did, our database would probably go from over 1,300 cases to a lot more cases.
Thanks for watching the Heritage Foundation's YouTube channel. With more than 500,000 members, we are the nation's largest conservative research and education institution. We believe the principles and ideas of the American founding are worth conserving and renewing. Please help us further our mission by subscribing to this channel and sharing our videos with your family and friends.